Annabelle, the haunted doll with malevolent eyes, sat quietly on the dusty shelf of an abandoned antique shop, her presence unnoticed by the new owners who had just moved in. They had no idea that their peaceful lives were about to be turned upside down by the eerie secrets the doll held within its porcelain frame. When Sarah, the daughter of the family, found Annabelle and decided to bring her home, she had no inkling of the chaos that would soon follow. The doll's innocent smile hid a sinister intent as strange occurrences began to plague the house, lights flickering, objects moving on their own, and whispers echoing in the hallways. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, they heard a sudden crash from the living room. Rushing to see what had happened, they found Annabelle sitting at the center of the room, surrounded by shattered glass and overturned furniture, her head slightly tilted as if she had been watching them. But amidst the terror, there were moments of dark humor that the doll seemed to relish. One night, the family dog barked furiously at Annabelle, only to yelp and retreat as the doll's head slowly turned to face him, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Sarah, unaware of the doll's true nature, started playing with Annabelle, dressing her up and hosting tea parties. Little did she know that Annabelle was playing her own game, subtly influencing Sarah's actions, leading her to say and do things that left the rest of the family unnerved. As the days passed, the family began to feel the doll's presence more acutely, with Sarah's laughter echoing eerily throughout the house as if she were not alone. They noticed that Annabelle was never where they had last left her, always seeming to find a new spot from which to observe them. One evening, Sarah's father decided to put the doll away in the attic, hoping to rid the house of its unsettling aura. But as he climbed the creaky stairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, every step growing heavier as Annabelle's eyes seemed to follow him. When he reached the attic, he hastily placed Annabelle in a dusty old trunk, slamming the lid shut. But as he turned to leave, the trunk burst open and Annabelle sat upright, her head cocked to the side in a mocking gesture. Panicked, he ran down the stairs, only to find Annabelle sitting calmly at the bottom, her expression unchanged but her presence more menacing than ever. The family was now fully aware that Annabelle was no ordinary doll, but something far more dangerous and malevolent. Sarah's mother, determined to protect her family, decided to seek help from a local priest known for dealing with the paranormal. The priest agreed to come to the house, but as he approached Annabelle, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, his hands trembling as he tried to perform the exorcism. To everyone's horror, Annabelle began to laugh, a high-pitched, eerie sound that reverberated through the house. The priest faltered, his voice wavering as Annabelle's laughter grew louder, filling the room with an unsettling sense of amusement. In a final desperate attempt, the priest sprinkled holy water on the doll, but Annabelle only smiled wider, her eyes glinting with malevolent glee. The family watched in terror as the priest was forced to retreat, admitting defeat in the face of the doll's unholy power. Now fully aware of the danger they were in, the family tried to get rid of Annabelle, but every attempt failed. No matter where they took her, whether to a distant field or raging river, Annabelle always found her way back, sitting patiently at the front door, waiting to be let in. The family was trapped in a nightmarish game, with Annabelle as the puppet master, pulling the strings with a twisted sense of humor. Every night, they could hear her tiny footsteps echoing through the house, her presence a constant reminder that she was always watching. Sarah, once innocent and carefree, began to change, her behavior growing more erratic as Annabelle's influence tightened its grip. She would speak in a voice that was not her own, her eyes taking on the same malevolent glint as the doll's, leaving her parents terrified for her soul. Desperate to save their daughter, Sarah's parents turned to the internet. searching for any way to break the curse that bound Annabelle to their family. They stumbled upon a forum of paranormal enthusiasts who shared their own experiences with haunted objects, offering advice that ranged from the bizarre to the terrifying. One suggestion stood out: a ritual involving a mirror, salt, and a silver coin, said to trap the spirit within the doll. With nothing to lose, they decided to try it, setting up the ritual in their basement late one night, hoping to finally rid themselves of Annabelle's curse. As they performed the ritual, the air in the basement grew cold, and a thick fog began to seep from the walls, swirling around Annabelle. The doll's eyes seemed to glow with an inner light, her expression growing more malevolent as the ritual reached its climax. But just as they thought they had succeeded, the mirror shattered, and the fog dissipated, leaving Annabelle untouched and more powerful than ever. The doll's laughter echoed through the basement, a mocking sound that sent chills down their spines as they realized they had only made things worse. Sarah's behavior became increasingly disturbing, her once bright eyes now dull and lifeless, as if she were merely a puppet controlled by an unseen force. She began to speak in strange languages, her voice unnervingly similar to Annabelle's, as if the doll were using her as a vessel. Her parents, now at their wits' end, decided to lock Sarah in her room, hoping to keep her safe from the doll's influence. But every night, they would hear the sound of laughter coming from behind the door, and when they opened it, they would find Sarah sitting with Annabelle, her eyes glazed over as if in a trance. The family tried to contact a renowned psychic, known for her ability to communicate with spirits, in a final attempt to free their daughter from Annabelle's grip. The psychic arrived, her presence calming the frantic parents, as she set up her tools and prepared to confront the spirit within the doll. As the seance began, the room grew dark, and the air became thick with tension. The psychic called out to the spirit, demanding it reveal itself, but the only response was a low, menacing chuckle from Annabelle, her eyes glinting with amusement. Suddenly, the psychic was thrown back against the wall, her body convulsing as Annabelle's power surged through the room. The family watched in horror as the psychic's eyes rolled back in her head, her voice distorting as she began to speak in tongues, channeling the dark energy within the doll. In a moment of clarity, the psychic managed to regain control, warning the family that Annabelle was not just a haunted doll, but a vessel for something far more ancient and malevolent. She urged them to leave the house and never return, for the spirit within the doll could not be defeated by mortal means. In a desperate bid to save their daughter, they decided to return to the house and confront Annabelle one last time. Armed with holy water, crucifixes, and ancient rituals, they prepared themselves for a final showdown with the malevolent spirit. As they entered the house, the air was thick with tension, and a sense of dread hung over them like a dark cloud. They could feel Annabelle's presence immediately, her gaze piercing through them as they approached the room where she had been left. The family formed a circle, clutching their holy symbols as they began to chant, their voices shaking as they tried to banish the spirit from the doll. But as they chanted, Annabelle's laughter filled the room once more, her eyes glowing with a sinister light as she seemed to feed off their fear. Suddenly, the room went dark, and a cold wind swept through the house, extinguishing the candles and leaving them in pitch blackness. The only sound was the faint, mocking laughter of Annabelle, growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. The family held their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests as they waited for something to happen. And then, in the darkness, they heard a soft, shuffling sound, the sound of tiny feet moving closer and closer. They could feel Annabelle's presence drawing near, the air around them growing colder with each step, and then, without warning, the lights flickered back on, revealing Annabelle standing in the center of the room, her eyes fixed on Sarah with an intense, malevolent gaze. In that moment, they knew that the doll was not just a vessel for a spirit, but a living entity, feeding off their fear and growing stronger with each passing day. The family was now trapped in a battle for their very souls, with Annabelle as their relentless, malevolent opponent. Desperate to end the nightmare, Sarah's mother lunged at the doll, determined to destroy it once and for all. But as she reached out to grab Annabelle, the doll's eyes glowed with a blinding light, and she was thrown across the room, crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. Sarah's father, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as Annabelle slowly turned her head to face him, her smile widening into a twisted, grotesque grin. The doll's laughter echoed in his ears, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his days. In a final act of desperation, Sarah's father grabbed the nearest object, a heavy, iron candlestick, and swung it at Annabelle with all his might. The doll's head snapped back with a sickening crack, and for a moment, it seemed as though they had won. But as they looked down at the shattered remains of the doll, they realized with horror that Annabelle was still smiling, her eyes glinting with malevolent glee. The doll's curse had not been broken, it had only grown stronger, feeding off their fear and despair. The family was now at the mercy of Annabelle, their lives forever entwined with the malevolent spirit that inhabited the doll. They could never truly escape her, for the curse had become a part of them, binding them to the doll for all eternity. Years passed, and the family learned to live with the constant presence of Annabelle, her influence becoming a twisted part of their daily lives. They could no longer remember what life had been like before the doll came into their lives, as if their memories had been swallowed by the darkness that surrounded her. Sarah, now a young woman, had grown accustomed to the doll's presence, her once vibrant personality now a distant memory. She spoke less and less, her eyes hollow and devoid of emotion, as if the doll had drained her of all joy and vitality. But even in the darkest moments, there were flashes of humor, twisted and dark as they were. The family would sometimes find Annabelle in ridiculous positions, perched on the edge of the bathtub, sitting at the dinner table with a fork in hand, or lying in bed with a book propped open on her lap. These moments of absurdity were fleeting, but they offered a brief respite from the constant fear that hung over the house like a dark cloud. The family would sometimes laugh, a nervous, strained laughter that barely masked the terror that lurked just beneath the surface. One day, Sarah found Annabelle sitting in her room, her head tilted to the side in a familiar, mocking gesture. But instead of fear, Sarah felt a strange sense of camaraderie with the doll, as if they were both trapped in the same nightmarish game, forever bound by the curse that had ensnared them. She began to talk to Annabelle, confiding in her as if she were a trusted friend. The doll, of course, never responded, but Sarah felt a strange comfort in the one-sided conversations, as if the act of speaking aloud could somehow keep the darkness at bay. But the doll's influence was always there, lurking in the background, subtly guiding Sarah's thoughts and actions. She would sometimes catch herself saying things that she didn't mean, or doing things that felt completely out of character, as if the doll was slowly taking control of her mind. One night, as Sarah lay in bed, she felt a cold hand brush against her cheek. She jolted awake, her heart pounding in her chest, but there was no one there, only Annabelle, sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes glinting with malevolent amusement. Sarah's fear turned to anger, and she grabbed the doll, determined to end the curse once and for all. But as she lifted Annabelle, She felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, as if the doll were warning her not to go through with it. The air in the room grew thick, and the walls seemed to close in around her as she stared into Annabelle's cold, unblinking eyes. She could feel the doll's power coursing through her, filling her with a dark energy that made her limbs heavy and her mind foggy. But instead of succumbing to the fear, Sarah found herself laughing a wild, manic laughter that echoed through the room, as if she had finally lost her grip on reality. The absurdity of the situation, the years of torment and fear, all came crashing down on her, and in that moment, she realized the true horror of it all. She was no longer just a victim of the curse, she had become a part of it, bound to Annabelle by a twisted sense of loyalty and dependence. The doll had won, not by brute force or fear, but by slowly, insidiously, wearing her down until she had nothing left to fight with. As Sarah's laughter died down, she placed Annabelle back on the shelf, her hands trembling as she did so. The doll's expression remained unchanged, but Sarah could sense a shift in the air, as if Annabelle was pleased with her obedience. The family continued to live with Annabelle, their lives forever altered by the presence of the haunted doll. They had learned to coexist with the darkness, finding moments of humor and absurdity in the midst of the horror, but they could never truly escape the curse that bound them. And so Annabelle remained, her malevolent eyes watching over the family, her power growing stronger with each passing day. The doll's laughter echoed through the house, a constant reminder that they were never truly alone, and that the darkness within her would never be vanquished. In the end, the family had become prisoners in their own home, trapped by the very thing they had sought to escape. The horror of Annabelle was not just in the supernatural events that plagued them, but in the slow, insidious erosion of their sanity, their will, and their very souls. They had tried to fight, to resist the doll's influence, but in the end, they had also come to the darkness, becoming mere shadows of their former selves. The story of Annabelle was not just a tale of terror, but a tragedy, a slow descent into madness, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Annabelle's story would live on, a chilling reminder of the power of fear and the darkness that can consume even the strongest of wills. And somewhere, in a quiet room filled with shadows, the doll would continue to watch, waiting patiently for her next victim, her next plaything in the endless, twisted game she played. And the game would never end.